So this afternoon I will spend some time, I'm not going to read the paper to you because that's not very interesting. But what I'm presenting comes out of this, and I've been told that something is supposed to be published out of these meetings, I think. So mine is almost ready. It's ready to be edited and placed. Hopefully it doesn't need too much editing. I've tried to do my best. Dr. Sandu has helped me improve here and there. So today, I've actually tried, the title and the program is so broad that I would need to come back and teach a class here at AUA to cover that title. Yeah. So what I've done is I've taken a particular issue, and I believe in looking at particularities in mission. It's important that we don't get so general that it's not useful to anyone. But not just a particular issue, I'm trying to be particular to Africa. So I had this conference was a great opportunity for me to grow my understanding of South Asians in Africa. And I've spent a lot of time researching this. So I will bring stuff from my experience, but also things that I have now researched for this continent and the South Asians in this continent. So, all right, we're ready to go. Quick plug for the Journal of Adventist Mission Studies. There's a typo there, it should be Adventist Mission Studies. For those of you who don't know, the Department of World Mission has been editing and publishing a peer-reviewed journal since 2005 on mission issues, and there's a wealth of knowledge there. And many of the questions that I've heard asked the last few days, you will find some very good articles that can help you grapple with some of those issues in the journal. And the beauty of it is they're all free. And they're online. You can download the PDFs. I've given you the website there. And you can download all the old ones and the new ones. And if you so desire, I can take your email and add you to the list so you will be reminded every time a new issue comes out. You will get an email with a link that you can then download the latest issue. Beyond that, we are always looking for people like you to send us good articles. And I know your dean has published through the journal. We're thankful for that. We want more and more coming from Africa. We want to see what the issues are. We want people to be writing on them. And so just so you have an idea, per month, we get 4,000 downloads. So if you want your ideas to get out there, it's a great way to get your ideas out there. 4,000 downloads, and I can actually see where they're being downloaded. And it's all over the world. We have people downloading articles on ministry to Muslims in Dubai and Saudi Arabia, places we cannot go. And we don't know what it's being used for, but we can only pray that the Holy Spirit is using it. I've even seen articles that were downloaded in the Vatican, which is kind of interesting. So if you want an opportunity to share some of your research, this is one way to do it. Okay, well, I believe in sharing my own credentials when I come to a place. So I usually share it by giving you a picture of my credentials and why I'm able to talk about Hindu issues. And the credentials are right there in the middle of the picture. So this is my family. Of course, my oldest son is here, Abhishek. And then we have our younger son, Andre, and my wife, Anu. We met in India, as I mentioned earlier, about 12 years ago. Got married in India about 10 years ago. And much of the knowledge I have is really not mine. It comes from her. Been very helpful in helping me grow and learn on these issues. And the beauty of communal cultures, as many of you are part of, is when you marry, you don't marry an individual, right? Yes. Families marry each other. That's something I had to learn, because that's not how we do it in North America. So I've become part of a much bigger family. This is only a small portion. I tell the joke, it's true, but it's funny. At my wedding, we invited 500 people. In India, that's not a large amount actually, maybe a smaller wedding. We invited 500, but about 1,000 people showed up, which was good. And of those, 1,997 of them were from my wife's side, and 3 were from my side. So I'm learning, I'm growing in my understanding of family. So I'm very thankful, and when we moved back to the U.S. to Andrews University, one of our greatest challenges was loneliness. Even for me, I'd become accustomed to always having my relatives at my house all the time in India. And it's been very difficult for us to adjust back to the U.S. Thankfully, there's a large contingent of Indian students, they're actually Hindus at Andrews University, who have become our family members, and they're always at our house. So somehow we're maintaining that connection. Okay, so that's the credentials. So let's get into the topic for today. Identity. Identity is a very important concept for missiology. Many of the issues we've talked about in the last few days are wrapped up in issues of identity. And it's particularly important for today, as I'll demonstrate, as we talk about a group of people who are outside of their native context in Africa now. But keep in mind, there's some important things we must keep in mind when we talk about identity. Many times we talk about people as if they have one identity and it's always the same. And identities have been shown very clearly to not be stagnant. There's something that's continually changing and growing, a person's identity. And there's an excellent philosopher, Kwame Anthony Appiah. He is from, and I may have pronounced that incorrectly, he's half Ghana, or Ghanaian, half English, but a wonderful author. And he's really demonstrated the complexity of identity in many of his books, and I really enjoy reading it. But he talks about it, you have multiple identities. So right now, my primary identity is an Andrews University professor at AUA presenting. But, for example, when Liverpool's playing in the final in Champions League, my primary identity is a Liverpool fan. Right? I see a fellow. And so where you are, what you're doing, actually, your primary identity even can change based on where you're at, what you're doing. And I can be both of those things. Now, right now, my Liverpool identity is not primary. But in another setting, when I'm with a group of people watching a Liverpool game, they don't care that I'm a professor at Andrews University, right? So it just shows identity is multiple. And of course, our primary identity is in God. But what that means in everyday life is changing and depending on location and so on. But then you have, in your identity, you have what we call habits. And I wish there was more missiological literature on habits. There are a lot of good studies that have demonstrated very clearly that about 95% of your daily life, so that's a vast majority of your daily life, you are doing things without reflecting on them. So most of what you do every day, you don't consciously think, okay, now I'm going to do this instead of this, and then I'm going to do this instead of that. You're not doing that. You're actually just doing things without thinking about it. 95% of what you do is habits. And many times in missiology, the things we talk about, like your beliefs, we want people to believe certain things and we want to convert them into believing certain things. That's actually only part of your 5% of what you're actually doing. Your habits are not just based on your beliefs. They're things you automatically do without thinking about your belief system. And many times, your daily activities, your habits, contradict your beliefs. They don't actually fit with your beliefs. So you can believe, for example, many people who believe in Darwin's theory of evolution, if they see someone next to them who needs help, they will help them. But that goes against their belief of the survival of the fittest, to use a very simplistic reduction. So their daily habits, the way they were brought up, taught them to do something that contradicts their belief. Well, we all do that all the time in various ways. Okay? But our primary influencers for our habits are our family and friends, the people we spend, especially when we were young. We see what they do, we start doing it too. Okay? So it's very important to keep that in mind. 95% of our life is habits. So we want to talk about someone who has a Hindu identity, which involves a lot of different things, but 95% of those things that they're doing, they're not thinking about. So us coming along and saying, okay, now you should believe this, even if they say I believe it, is not going to change that 95%. We actually have to inculcate new habits. And that takes a lot of time and effort to develop new habits and break old habits. So when we talk about transformation, that's what we're talking about. Okay? Now we also believe that our identity is impacted by the Spirit of God. So we're not like, Apia is just going to tell us all the society issues that impact our identity, but he's not going to go into God's influence. But we believe we're created in the image of God, which impacts our identity, all humanity. We also believe in cosmic conflict. So everything we develop, all our habits, are developed in this sphere in which God and Satan, through their followers, are trying to get us to go their direction. And our habits are developing inside that cosmic conflict. Okay, and this is just background to what I'm about to show for the South Asians in this context. So what we can say about identity is there's a lot of tensions. You have all these things. You have your habits, beliefs, you have the Spirit of God, you have Satan. All these things are coming together in one person or even a group of people and influencing them, and out of that comes your identity. And it can be very confusing sometimes, difficult to understand. Then, if you come to a group of people who live in a place where they're the minority, South Asians in Africa being an example, all of these things become much more important to them. They hold on to all of these things much more tightly. So their identity of being South Asian, Indian, and Hindu, because they're surrounded by non-Hindus from non-Asian background, becomes very important to them. And they're going to cling to that identity as hard as they can and fight against anything that tries to change that. So when we have South Asians in Africa, they're going to work very hard to keep hold of their identity, and that will include their Hindu identity, which creates a challenge for us, right? As we share with them in this context. There's a history that's also important, and history is always important. I don't know, do they have church history yet here at AUA? Working on it. Masters. So church history is extremely important, and history in general, very, very important to understand issues of identity. So many of the South Asians who came to Africa have a history of indentured servanthood. That's how they came, especially South Africa, Kenya. They came through the British colonial system, and they came as indentured servants, especially in Kenya, to work on the railroad. That was their prime. But as they did that, they started building shops along the railroad, and then put roots down here. But their history is one of indentured servanthood, kind of a marginalized, oppressed group in some sense. And so that history included being viewed by whites, sorry, I'm missing a few words there, as inferior. So the white British Empire looked at them as inferior, and then the African population saw them maybe not as inferior, but strange and different. Right? Different looks, different rituals, different lifestyles, different foods. So they find themselves neither part of the colonial British side nor of the African side. They're somewhere outside of these spheres. And of course in South Africa this is especially true where they were strongly affected by apartheid, in which they had to go through many of the same issues as other Africans, yet they also struggled with Africans. And there were issues there, if you look into the history. And so that's part of their history, and they're passing that on, right, to their children, that this is part of their identity. The reality also is there's a lack, and this is backed up by a lot of empirical data. And the footnotes are there in the paper when it's published, you can see. There's a lack of in-depth relationships between Africans and South Asians even to the present. So you may have what we call superficial relationships. You meet in the store. You go to the shops and buy something from the Indian market. You go to school together even. And may play together as children and so on. But when we talk about home space, the house, and I know we talked about the house with Islam and so on, consistent sharing of the home space between Africans and South Asians is very, very limited. They're not in your homes, you're not in their homes on a regular basis, right? And so if we're talking about identity transformation, is that possible if we're not in each other's homes regularly? Okay. Another challenge is rarely, and there are exceptions, but it's rare to have intermarriage between Africans and South Asians. There are exceptions. You can see videos that the exceptions were very difficult for the people who went through the process. A lot of challenges, especially for the South Asians. Their families will reject them, and a lot of challenges. And this is, how do you build relationships? How do you create transformative experiences when these barriers are there? Can be difficult. And you know, we talked yesterday, I think someone established that marriage wasn't a primary mission method. But it's very interesting if you read history, for example, South African history. This is a little bit off course. There was an interview done with some South Africans who were kind of disappointed in Christianity, or not Christianity, with missionaries, I should say, white, British and other missionaries. And when they asked them why they were not happy with the colonial missionaries and so on, one of the main things they said is, these people come and claim to love us, willing to marry with us. And I think there's something there we need to keep in mind. I know we talk a lot about people groups and some of those kinds of things, and you need Indians for Indians and Kenyans for Kenyan. But I think when we're ready to marry each other, and I can testify to this, right? But there's actually a depth of relationship there that's very, very meaningful and demonstrates something very important. When we're able to marry, and I don't use the word cross-cultural, I believe in intercultural mission, because when we cross something, we usually can cross back. But when you have good mission, once you go, there's no turning back. And you are changed, and they're changed, everyone's changed. There's not, and something new comes out of that. So I believe in intercultural mission and marriage. Not that that's the only way to do mission, but I think it's a sign, when we're not able to marry together, that's a sign of a deeper issue. Okay? And unfortunately, from the data, it appears the main reason intermarriage has not taken place is because of the South Asians. They're less open to it. Africans have been more open to it from the research when they interview people and ask. South Asians are closed to it. So it's a challenge. Now at the same time, these South Asians, many of them are third, fourth, fifth generation in Africa. And they identify as South Asian, but they also identify as Kenyan and South African. And they speak the languages here. And language is a major part of identity. So they have all these tensions going into their identity. And you even have food, right? So you know, we've had chapati since I've been here. That came from India. I know we have some arguments back at Andrews. Our Kenyan friends claim chapati, and my wife claims chapati, and they both try to claim chapatis. And I just say, cook them and let me eat them. But I don't care who it is, a Kenyan or an Indian. Or you have, for example, I think in Uganda, they have what's called the rollite. It's like a street food, which it's chapati and like egg and potato rolled up in it. So they've come together, they've fused together, and they've created a new food, which is a beautiful thing, I think. So they have this in their identity too. They are African to a certain extent. And they say that. They're proud to be Kenyan, many of them. So that's also part of their identity. A huge part of their identity, and this is going to be the focus of the rest of this presentation though, is in their festivals, their worship, and their deities. These are things they've really clung to in Africa, and they do it in India too, but they celebrate their Hindu holidays and festivals very faithfully, and you probably have seen it. Some of you may have experienced it. They build their temples. They maintain home worship with deities. And these are very, very important to their identity. Many studies show maybe the most important thing to their identity is this element: festivals, rituals, worship, and deities. Very important to their identity. So all these things come together to make their identity. Okay? So I want to talk a little bit about rituals. And I'm going to start by talking about it in India, where my experience comes from, just to give you an idea, and then we'll talk about here in Africa. Again, for many Hindus, not just in Africa, but in India as well, their primary faith identity, their primary faith meaning in their faith is from their rituals. So there's sacred texts, and even Ramesh mentioned this, many of them have only read small parts of the sacred text. Their most important faith element is the rituals, doing the rituals regularly and doing them correctly. That's their primary identity markers. So here we have, this was my neighbor, very close friend in India, and this is there at their house. This is the setup of their morning puja, or worship space. And I want to point out a few things. Number one, you see images of different deities. So when they worship, they're using sight. You have, you can't see, maybe it's a little bit zoomed out, but you have their sugar, flowers, and these are presented to the deities in the morning there. You have different powders like saffron, turmeric. You will light incense. So how many of your senses? You have 5 senses, right? Touch, smell. How many do you use in a morning puja? All of them. You use all 5 senses in your morning puja. You touch, you smell, you see, you feel, and then you take the sugar and you eat it. So they use all 5 senses in the morning worship every day, right? Okay? And they keep this in their house. Some people, like my neighbor, was, not very wealthy, so they have a space in their kitchen. People who are wealthier will often have a separate room where they keep these things in the house. And some Hindus who were more maybe orthodox or strict in their life wouldn't even let me go near that space because it would become impure. So, and they very respectfully would say, we won't allow you into that part of the house because you're not Hindu, and we don't want to. They weren't trying to be negative towards me. They just were telling me that. So this is just the home worship, and I'm going fast here because of time. The temple is very similar in the sense when you go to the temple, often, and this is South India, North-South is a little different in many of these things. Again, Hindu is many things. It's not one religion, as Umesh so well showed us. But at the temple, you're typically going to ring a bell, let the deity know you're there. You're going to bring flowers, sweets, coconut. You're going to present those to the deity. The priest is going to say mantras for you. You're going to do your own private prayer. You're going to look in the deity's eyes. That's very, very important. We talked about darshan. The priest is going to give you your prasad. We talked about it. You're going to eat that. Again, how many of the senses are you using? All 5. You use all 5 in the service, the temple worship service. Festivals are another huge thing, and I don't want to spend too much time. They're a big deal. You have the Kumbh Mela that happens, which is considered the largest religious gathering of human beings anywhere on earth. We're talking about tens of millions of people coming in a very small space to go into the river and worship and so on. Very important to Hindus. Okay? Now in Africa, it's the same. The primary tie for South Asians to India, many of them have lost touch with their relatives. Some of them have maintained, but many of them have lost touch with their relatives. They don't actually have any physical tie to India anymore, but the rituals are their primary tie to India. And they don't want to lose that tie. They don't want to lose it. So they're somewhat removed from their Indian roots, right? Ritual is what really gives them their identity. Many, for example, in South Africa, studies show many of the Indians have forgotten their language group, like Tamil, Hindi. Many of them no longer know those languages, but they still keep the rituals very faithfully. So the rituals were more important than language even. All right, so we're at a university, and my understanding of academia is a good thing. It's a place where we can start to ask hard questions and try to grapple with them. And as Adventists, rituals is a hard question. Let me demonstrate why. We have a very good and positive Protestant heritage, which we should be thankful for. We came in the mid-1800s out of a long history of Protestant groups. And those Protestant groups had come out of a Roman Catholic background in which rituals had been abused and misused. Therefore, we came from an anti-Catholic background in the sense of anti-Catholic ritual. And I remember talking to one of my students from Kenya who said in his context, and you can verify this is true or not, he said they don't even talk about ritual. The members don't want to talk about ritual because of the Roman Catholic tie and other things. So they don't talk about ritual. So what we have in our history is this kind of pushing aside of ritual because of the real abuse. And Adventists focused on beliefs, which is good and very important. But in the process, and often this happens with issues, the pendulum swings one way or the other, we have neglected a theology of rituals. We don't have a strong understanding of ritual. And so when we come to contexts like South Asia, or South Asians in Africa, or maybe Africa itself, we struggle to know how to deal with rituals. The easiest thing is just to reject them. That's the easy thing to do initially. But what does that do to people's identity? Especially South Asians who are really trying to hold on to their South Asian identity, and the primary way they hold on to it is through ritual. And we don't have a strong theology of ritual. So what we say is you can't do those things, but we don't tell them what they can do. Now, if I were to remove ritual from the Old Testament, all the passages in the Old Testament about ritual, what would we be left with? Well, there are a few books of the Bible that would be gone. Leviticus would basically be gone. It wouldn't be in the Bible anymore. So, the Bible talks about rituals, many rituals. So maybe this is something we need to be working on. Africans' rituals and African Adventists. And I want to highlight here something Dr. Osindo said yesterday that is really important. We are at a stage now, I think, where we are desperately in need of African theologians and missiologists to help not only Africa, but the world. You have unique experiences and developed theologies that are very important in your Adventist identity that can actually help the rest of the world deal with some of these issues. Let me demonstrate why. Africa has a strong ritual background, and there's plenty on this, a rich tradition of ritual. Now, Adventists in Africa have struggled sometimes with ritual, discussing it. But I think, I come from North America, and ritual is almost meaningless. We are all individuals. We have rituals for ourselves, but we don't call them that. We have habits. It's very difficult. It would be very difficult for North Americans to develop a theology of ritual. South Asia, we don't have a lot of strength in numbers. We don't have a lot of theologians coming from India. But in Africa, we do. And I'm very happy to see publications are starting to come out that can help us have theology of rituals. I know your dean has written on the anointing on oil. Very important to discuss. And I have in the paper a large footnote where we have people are starting to discuss issues of ancestor worship. These are Adventist publications and rituals, healing, initiation rites. And these are all African issues, African rituals. But what you're producing is actually helping the world church understand better how to engage ritual in general. And we need that in North America. We have actually a young people who are searching for churches that have more rituals. That actually, we have cases where people left Protestant backgrounds to become Roman Catholic because they wanted more ritual. Now it's unfortunate because of the rituals they're going to learn, but there may be a lesson there that we need to do more work on ritual. So Africa, you have that background, you can now help the world church. you can help us understand this better. We need more on Hindu rituals, though. And as far as I'm aware, there's very few Africans who have tried to engage the South Asian context from this angle. There are some... Yeah. Okay. You said add 1 hour, right?
10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes. Yeah, I'm almost to the end. So we have a few dissertations, deep-end dissertations that dealt with, for example, Dr. John Shumba in Zambia looked at South Asian issues in Zambia, but he focused on beliefs. He doesn't talk about ritual, which is good. It's a good dissertation. You should read it if you're interested in mission to South Asians, but he doesn't deal with rituals. So it's an area of weakness, but not just here. In India, too, we need more on this. And again, I'm looking for some of you here to help us as a world church do this. Along the way, there's some other areas, some barriers that we have to work through. Harmful stereotypes of Hindus has also challenged Africans. When I informally interviewed African students at Andrews from around East Africa and South Africa, their typical understanding of Hindus was idol worshippers, which we talked about. And so that's the stereotype. You're just about idol worshippers, you're pagan, and that's about all you are. Right? Well, that's a harmful stereotype, and you need to take the time to get to know them, to learn what they do, why they do rituals, and so on, in order to overcome those stereotypes. Now, unfortunately, the stereotypes go both ways. So South Asians have often developed stereotypes of Africans. And I know we talked about earlier the baptism. Some South Asians don't want to be baptized by an African. That's unfortunate. There's a lot of prejudice on the South Asian side towards Africans. And so these are major challenges that we would have to deal with if we're going to be serious about mission. That make it difficult but important that we engage with. So how, I don't have the answer for all these things. It's going to take some of you taking the time, and you're going to have to basically decide, I'm willing to devote my life to interacting with a few Hindu families. My home is their home is my home. Learning the rituals, learning why they do them, and not expecting any baptismal results in the end. It may come, but it may not. Are you willing to, are our conference leaders willing to say to a pastor or to a church planter or to a pioneer, we don't expect any baptisms from you, but we do expect you to have meaningful relationships with Hindus. And it's very hard to convince conference administrators to do that. But I think that's with this South Asian community who's clinging to their identity. If we go into any group expecting lots of baptisms, we're going to quit very early in the process. Because they're going to cling to their identity. They're not going to just be open to what you're doing. It's going to take time, a lot of time. Cosmic conflict is very important to keep in mind here, and I often remind people that while rituals that many South Asians are doing are directed towards a view of God and deities that are not true, we have to keep in mind that I like to believe that we can't give Satan all the credit here. We often talk about the world as though Satan has darkened the whole world and God can only reach people if I go there. So if Satan can have the power to influence the whole world, I assume God can too. So we have to approach and look for God's footprints even in the rituals. And even if that just means, while we disagree with the rituals themselves maybe, we recognize that at least Hindus see value in ritual and serving God and worshiping God. How ritual is important, not necessarily exactly the ritual in detail, but we can learn what importance there is to have rich rituals in your life that inform your faith. As Seventh-day Adventists, we have struggled with that. We have communion, which in most places is limited in what it achieves. We have foot washing, we have baptism, and then that's about all the rituals we have. And even those we haven't thought as rituals very carefully. So we need more creativity. How can we have creative Adventist rituals that are in line with Scripture, Because if you're going to engage with Hindus in this context, and you don't have any rituals, and you're going to ask them to stop doing their rituals, and then what are they going to do? They're just going to believe Adventist faith, and what are they going to do every day with that 95% of their life and the habits they develop? It's empty. I've had Hindus come and talk to me and say, you know, your ideas of God are very good, Jesus sounds good, but your religion is dead. You don't have any rituals. That's a dead religion. And they want me to become Hindu because they see more value in what they're doing. Now, I don't believe my faith is dead, but I've had to learn that maybe I should be more understanding of what they're saying, and maybe I can have a more tangible side to my faith in ritual. So if we're going to be serious about the South Asian communities in Africa, we're going to have to be serious about rituals. I think the tools are there, they're coming out for African side. Now we need to move into the South Asian side, take some of the same principles and start dealing with rituals in the South Asian context. As I come to the end, I want to give you an opportunity here. This is something I do in my classes. And this is something, I want you to actually do this together here. We're going to read through this. This is based on a real-life case study, but it's an open-ended question at the end. And what I'm doing here is I'm trying to get you to process the issue, but I also am giving you a way you can help your church members. You can take this same thing and talk to your church members about any given issue and give them a scenario that demonstrates the challenge of the issue and don't give them an answer, which then empowers them to try to faithfully follow God's leading to come up with an answer. I dream of the day when our board meetings would not be about nominating committees and what color the walls of the church should be, but we were actually putting these kinds of things on the table and asking the church board, what do we do about this issue? So let's look at this. Put yourself in this scenario. You've developed a meaningful relationship with a South Asian family in your neighborhood, which could easily happen right here in Africa. They identify themselves as practicing Hindus. You've noticed how they worship when you visit their home. Remember, they're using all 5 senses. You have even asked questions and learned about their deities that they worship and the many rituals they participate in when they worship, which includes elements that engage all 5 senses. You even visited the local Hindu temple with them and see what worship looks, sounds, and feels like there. You realize this is all very different from the church setting you attend regularly on Sabbath. They are not only used to worshiping differently, but they also do not have a set day to worship, adding to the differences. As the relationship has grown, the family has shown interest in your faith and desires to learn more, so you ask them to come to church. They, however, feel extremely uncomfortable with this idea and politely decline the offer because they feel it would be too strange for them. You would like them to experience God and eventually worship Him, but are unsure as to how best to help this family do this when you know that your ways of worshiping are so different from theirs. How should you proceed? How do you proceed in that scenario? They're not going to come to the church. And most of the South Asians in Africa aren't going to come to the church. They are not going to come to your church. Even if they're your good friends, they're not going to come to the church. So do we just leave it at that, and that's too bad for them? How do you proceed in this scenario? What do you think? Any thoughts?
We must give them the gospel in Hindu plates.
Okay, so we have to go to where they are, which in this case it's going to be their home. Yeah, so we can have house churches, right? They're not going to look at it. We can meet with people regularly in their home. Dare we try to be creative in even creating rituals? Or is that too far removed from the Adventist faith? What do you think? Can we be creative in line with Scripture, in line with what we see in the Bible? Can we actually be creative? Maybe. I would like to think we can. I think if we were, you would have a better chance of getting deeper faith change transformation in this scenario. This is one scenario. Let me give you another scenario. Over the past several years, you built up meaningful friendship with a professional person in your office. They self-identify as a Hindu and are active in their Hindu faith. They've even invited you to participate in some of their favorite holidays. While you refrained from participating in any aspects which compromised your faith, you quickly realized that much of the holiday was wrapped up in worship to deities and involved stories of sacred events in history that were meaningful to your Hindu friend. Based on your relationship, you realize there are many of these special occasions throughout the year, and that these are the times when they celebrate with their family and enjoy special programs, they worship and have special food. Your friend has shown a lot of interest in your faith and has even started praying to Jesus and reading the Bible. They tell you that they're open to following Jesus, but that there's a major question they have that may decide whether or not they follow through. They want to know why you do not seem to have any festivals or holidays connected to your faith. They ask, when are the times you celebrate life together and God at the same time? You're caught off guard by this question and struggle to answer what's the best way to address this challenge. And these are real scenarios I've had to face. These are not made up. These are real questions people have asked. How do you answer these? And this may decide whether they continue to follow Jesus or not. Because why should they follow a God that doesn't demand them to use all 5 senses? That doesn't have a life of ritual, those habits, that 95% of your life. Why should they follow that God? So I think my time is up. I'll leave you with those challenges. I don't have all the answers. I look forward to partnering with you and coming up with some of the answers. Thank you.